Here we are. So, welcome everybody. We are privileged tonight to have Mark here, who is the director of Resiliency, I guess,
Yeah,
Chief
that's good. That's
uh,
good.
and has been heavily involved in the Dutch dialogues and in trying to implement some of the ideas there. And, is probably the person most finely attuned to the issues here as the city sees them. We had a chance for Jason to come talk to us, and he has some process issues and some other issues, of course, with it. He's representing basically the environmental interests almost exclusively, and Mark has a broader sort of mandate, and so he brings a slightly different approach to the problem and nuance. But I won't take words away from him. I'll let him speak. So thank you so much, Mark. I like your background, by the way.
Well, thank you. You can thank my wife. She does my decorating. So
Okay, very good.
I'm doing a lot from here. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And let me just say that I really look forward to the opportunity to engage with members of the college. And I'm really interested in everybody's feedback, because that's my role right now, is to get out and get everybody's feedback. And a class like this gives me an opportunity to get some good thoughts, and I want to hear what people have to say, because that's important when you're getting ready to move forward on almost a $2 billion project. It's really important to understand what people have to say. So let me start just by asking the question: how much does everybody know about the project or the study? Someone answer that?
We've gone through the web page, and I'll
Okay.
let people speak for themselves and talk about it. Of course, I'm familiar with it in the Dutch dialogues when the Corps of Engineers,
Yeah.
their section of it. But you guys, what have you found out so far?
So we learned about this project from the perspective of the Coastal Conservation League, which has basically represented the perspective that what the Corps of Engineers is presenting is the minimalist solution, basically the easiest, quickest solution that can be applied, and that what might result of that is, first of all, a lack of nuance, that there could be better solutions that are being overlooked because the Corps of Engineers isn't funded enough to look into that nuance, and also that it's a very temporary solution that might actually make the situation worse down the line, potentially trapping the citizens of Charleston into a flooding bowl.
That's certainly part of it. That was reasonably well said. Shall we see what other people have to say, Mark, or do you want to respond?
Yeah, no, I'd love to hear what everybody has to say.
Right. Holland, have you had a chance to go through this? You have something you want to say here?
Basically everything that Gabriel said, but I'm definitely interested on hearing your opinion and anything else that you can share with us about this.
Right. What was your sense of it? Are you from Charleston home?
I am.
I thought I remembered that. And so what was your sense of it in terms of its effect on the community, both aesthetically and functionally, or just from your perception of the culture of this place?
I mean, I think I definitely know there's need for change in some areas, but I do worry about, how much it might aesthetically affect and change Charleston and what, people come to Charleston and love about Charleston.
Yeah, it's certainly, doesn't seem to be any really great some damage anyway. Mm-hmm. Jason, are you still working, or are you at a point where you can talk? You must be.
I'm sorry, Professor, I can't talk at the moment.
That's fine. That's fine, Jason. We'll catch up with you later. Emma, are you there?
Hey, I'm here.
Very good. So what's your response at this point? What are your concerns? What do you see as being the issues from your standpoint in this issue of the barrier that the Corps would like to build?
Sorry, are you specifically talking to me?
Yes, Emma, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, sorry. Well, I think my main concern, I guess, is like how it's going to affect West Ashley and Mount Pleasant, but I don't really think they know the answers to that yet, I guess.
Right, so you're considered the area, worried about the area outside the wall.
Yeah. Because haven't they said that is like going to increase the water in like other areas? If it could.
Actually, what's interesting is one of the mandates that the Corps of Engineers has is that this project cannot it cannot cause any harm anywhere else. They can't build one project in a location and that particular project cause harm elsewhere. So
Mhm.
a lot of people, that's a legitimate concern. A lot of people do have that concern, fully understand that concern, but they, there is the idea they just can't do that. So starting in September, they're going to take all of the adjustments that they've made to date, and they're going to rerun those through models to make sure that's not happening. And they have to report out whether it does or does not, and if it does, what kind of mitigation action would they take for that. But that's a very legitimate concern. And if I were a resident of West Ashley, and certainly a city employee, you know, we represent West Ashley as much as the peninsula. So it is important to us as well. Let me just back up for a minute and say, this is a planning class, right? City
Yes, that's correct. Well,
Yeah, so I would just want to go back a little bit because I think what's really important here is the concept of government and how governments work together and the responsibility of government. So we have an existential problem in our city. It's throughout the city. You saw it 2 weeks ago with that flooding we had. You saw it yesterday. It's a problem we've got that's not going to go away. We can't will it away. We can't wish it away. It's here. And quite frankly, we have to deal with it is what it comes down to. So these types of problems are very, very, very expensive. You know that the price tag on this solution is about $1.8 billion, of which the city would be on the hook for about $600 million. Okay. Which means somebody else is paying about $1.4 billion, 1.3, $1.4 billion. That doesn't come your way very often in terms of money to help you with a problem. Right now in the government, and this is again going back to like a government class, in the government, the only game in town for money to help with this is the Army Corps of Engineers. Under this particular administration for these big infrastructure projects, and it's been this way for a while, it's the Army Corps of Engineers through the Water Resources Defense Act. So those are really key terms if you're going to do city planning, municipal planning, because those are ways that you as a government employee are going to help your city be able to access really needed critical federal funds, or by being able to work within this legislative process to get your city on the docket to receive money. Okay, all that being said, we got through that. We wrote some letters. We were able to get through that. We're on this study. Now, you know what it is. You jump into a process with somebody, it's their process, right? So that's the process we're in. The Word of Bill, the federal legislation, outlines how these things go. But I want to try something real quick. If you all can bear with me. Do you mind if I share my screen for a minute? I want to show.
no, that's fine. Just to point out, Yante, we'll get your perspective from public health here in just a minute, okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
I need you to open up screen share for me.
Okay, let me see. So that would be under restrictions, I guess, right?
I don't know.
Yeah, let me see. Share, yeah. You're the first person to ask me to do that. Multiple can share simultaneously. Okay. All right, so now we have multiple shares.
Okay. What I hope I can do is, here you go. Okay. I want to show you something, and this is not to scare you, but just watch this for a minute. As soon as I get it running for you.
Yeah, sure.
Here it is right here. Okay, this came to us. We didn't go out looking for this. This came to us. And the most important thing I want to tell you about this is actual. This is done with the best possible science that exists in the world today. So pay attention, please.
So are you going to click on these and it'll come up on the screen?
You can't see it yet?
No, all I get is the email here.
All right, I'm sorry. Hang on a minute. Yeah, this happened to me last time.
Yeah, if you look at the order that Zoom gives you a chance to show screens. The most recent one you've opened up will be the first one.
Come on, man. Yeah, this isn't working right for me. I apologize. This happened to me last time too.
Well, we're working through these issues. We got no trouble here.
All right. Let's try this again. I'm sorry. Better get good at this because I'm doing a lot of them.
If you go ahead and start the video, then that screen will pop up, and then you can share that screen
All right.
between the email and another screen without you telling it to.
Yeah, it's not letting me do it. Okay. Oh, wait a minute. I know what I did wrong. Hang on a second.
See, guys, I'm not the only one who has difficulty with Zoom sometimes.
I do this so often. It's bothersome that it's not letting me do it.
Well, you can send me the link and I'll show it on my screen, but one way or the other, we'll get it done.
All right. That's not that one. It's this one I want to show you. So let's see what happens if I can do it. All right. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to hit this. Okay. I see what I did wrong. Can you see it now?
We've got the bridge.
Okay. There you go. Sorry. I figured it out. Here we go. This is the, this is what I want to show you.
We have sound. This would be if it made landfall in Charleston or still in on.
That's correct. This is a Hurricane Hugo today in Charleston.
Right. Last time it actually hit an Ondal, right? Now, for some reason, we've had we're not getting the picture anymore. Hello.
I don't think he's here anymore.
Yeah, I think he just dropped out. Maybe his bandwidth gave out. Yeah. He'll come back to us, I'm sure. Let me try sending him. I'm going to pause recording.
Are they required to go back to the starting board and start again, or do they just say we can't do it and wash their hands of it?
Yeah. Well, this is where, technical planning and politics gets wound up together, doesn't it? Because it's really hard to back off of commitments like that, or at least getting people's hopes up. So, yeah, the question is really, the short answer is yes, they're supposed to back off. The longer answer is that doesn't happen very often.
I guess it ruins their reputation.
Well, I mean, people get their hopes up. And they, feel like, they're getting something. Anytime people are doing something concrete, no pun intended, then, the sense is that there's progress happening. And trying to learn to understand the science of it is something that's harder to persuade people of than simply building it.
Now, surely this will be one of those situations where we really won't know how much we're going to have to deal with that issue until we get there, if we do get there. But it makes me wonder in that situation whether, how much innovation can be squeezed out that they can really solve the issue totally, or if some caveats or some compromises have to be made with the obligations they have to the environment, to the city, to the surrounding area of how they implement the solution.
Well, this is something else that I wanted to bring up at some point. This is not the solution. It is a solution to part of the problem. It deals with storm surge, right? Flooding, no, nothing to do with flooding. I know it seems like an artificial idea to separate the two, but they are different. the storm surge as a result of hurricanes, and as a result of sort of Mother Nature,
Mhm.
is something that FEMA has to kick in for. FEMA's already involved, so the
Yeah.
has a vested interest there.
Yeah, that's what like I was kind of against the whole idea completely. Like I was really closed-minded until I was reading the one of the articles that you posted for us to our research for the paper, and
Yeah.
it specified how the surge wall is totally separate from the flooding. Like it, like you said, it's really hard to like kind of see the two in a different light, but they're separate. The wall is not for the purpose of preventing flooding, because that's inevitable. Like everyone knows that's going to happen regardless. So once I realized that, it's kind of a protective measure for actual hurricanes, then I was kind of able to like understand the purpose more. Because at first it wasn't really clear. I thought it was for flooding too.
Right.
That's why I was like, well,
That's a natural thought going into it.
Yeah.
Mark, I'm sorry we lost you there for a minute. We were just
Had
carrying
a hard crash, man. My computer crashed hard. I don't know what's caused it, but I had to reboot everything. I apologize. So anyway, the video was done by Climate Central. They're doing those around the world, actually. And they came to us with that about 4 months ago. And they said, hey, we're doing this. We would like for you to know about it because we're going to do it whether you want us to or not. And they're working with Google. So we actually got a chance to work with Google on it. It was all the brand new Google technology. But that's legitimately what a storm surge event like Hugo would look like in Charleston today, which is what this wall's designed to protect against.
Yeah, and that was what Yante was talking about, was that one of the things that gets lost somehow in a cursory reading of the headlines is that this is not the solution. It's just a solution of part of the overall series of problems that we had.
Man, that is so insightful. And I caught the last half of that conversation that, you start with, so a lot of people have been going back to the Dutch dialogues. And if you haven't had a chance to read those are great to read. But when the Dutch talk about protecting the peninsula, they start with, you have got to have a perimeter protection system. You have to. Because remember, the Dutch in 1953 made a commitment that nobody else from the Netherlands would die from a flood. So life safety is their most important criteria. So they start with dikes and perimeter protection to make sure that they don't have storm surge in their country. This is that for the perimeter of Charleston. And so what it would do essentially is create a polder, make the peninsula into a polder.
We should describe what a polder is. I'm not sure everybody knows.
So a polder is where you take a piece of land and you put a perimeter protection around it, and therefore it is now no longer attached to the sea, but almost an island in and of itself. But the important thing about a polder is that the water inside the polder has to be managed. Okay, has to be managed. And our trip to the Netherlands, we saw that they actually manage their water throughout the country within millimeters. They have teams of young people, and I call them young people because they all were everywhere we went, teams of young people sitting around looking at computer screens, managing water throughout the country, making sure that it didn't move too much inside of the polders. So this for us would be the beginning of that. The peninsula needs a perimeter protection system, not only to prevent storm surge, which is the most deadly, most costly of all threats that we face, but you can't begin to manage the water inside of it until you have a perimeter protection system, if you're going to use the polder type system. And I talked to them today. I actually talked to the Dutch today, and they reconfirmed that. So what does that mean? That means that we as a city have to be ready to manage the water through our deep tunnel system, through our gravity drainage systems. The Army Corps is going to install a series of pumps as part of this project because, again, by law, they're not allowed to increase the amount of stormwater in the city. So they're barrier protection, that wall, if it adds 1 inch of water in a rainstorm to the city, those pumps have to be able to get rid of that 1 inch of water. That's the way their project is. Again, it can't do more harm.
Well, I think you made that point very well, and your video talks about the threat, I think, very well indeed. I guess the question comes up is like, planning is all interrelated, as we know,
Yep.
and this is just one of the solutions. How do you see the other parts of it, which are really equally as vital, coming into play? Right now we have sometimes we'll end up with a half solution that might be worse than no solution to some extent. So we have to ask ourselves, how do we see ourselves staging it? The Dutch basically skirted the question by saying, well, whenever you have a disaster, you'll take the federal money from the disaster and you apply it towards a long-range plan. That sounds like a good thing if you completely ignore the human cost of the process.
That's correct. And we as a city, we're not taking that approach. Our approach is we want to get a signed report and get this done and get it on the books as fast as we can. We don't want to see death and destruction come to our city. We just don't. Now, here's something for everyone to ponder. So the federal government, by design, has to do this so it's the most cost effective. They studied a 7-foot wall, a 9-foot wall, and a 12-foot wall. They compared the cost of building a 7-foot, 9-foot, 12-foot compared to the amount of benefits that it would have at each of those heights. The 12-foot wall wins out by spades because of sea level rise, climate change, and the likelihood of storm frequency and the amount of damage that would occur at a 7 and a 9 that wouldn't occur at a 12.
We probably should take just a minute and describe what the datum is that you're using as a basis for those elevations.
So the datum, this is great conversation, a great discussion. So the datum we're using is NAVD88, okay? So the way I describe it, here's the best way to look at it. The high battery is at 9 feet NAVD88.
That's on top of the seawall as you're walking.
That's on top of the high part of the seawall. You add 3 feet to that, so that's the height of the wall. It's going to be right there. That will hold out a 15-foot tide. Tides are measured at mean low, low water. Okay? So 12-foot NAVD88 will hold out a 15-foot tide. What is really hard for people to get their heads wrapped around is that we are projecting 50, 60 years into the future when we're talking about having 15-foot tides because of sea level rise. That's what we're trying to protect against. The concept of a 12-foot wall is really a difficult concept for people to understand. But what's important to keep in mind is most of the peninsula is somewhere between 5 and 10 feet NAVD88 already. So about the highest this wall is going to be is 7 feet anywhere. The lowest it's going to be is somewhere around 2 feet as you get further up the peninsula. It may only be 2 feet high, but it's got to provide the same level of protection.
Yeah, of course, there are a lot of variables there. One of the things, we've got a variety of things that we're talking about. Aside from the deep water wells with pumps and the seawall, what other aspects of the Dutch plan do you see going into place in the immediate future?
Of the Dutch plan?
Yeah, right. They had a series of measures.
Yeah, on the peninsula, I think because it's so urban there, and we've talked with them about this, the deep tunnel systems, you know, in certainly probably the next 10 years, finishing those deep tunnel systems up is probably the best we can do because of funding, okay? They're part of the system, and certainly the Septima Clark system's got to get done. We have to make improvements to the gravity drainage systems. That's cleaning out a lot of old pipes and old archways. Looking for storage where we can. You know, we're building many buildings downtown right now, have big cisterns underneath of them or cisterns alongside of them. We've got to get more stringent in our stormwater regulations to make sure that people hold on to their water for longer periods of time to give it a chance to drain. We've done things like the backflow preventers, which are not, you know, they're good for some things, but they're not good for everything.
Right.
So we're doing what we can. The Dutch made an approach of take the water on the high ground, which would be meeting in King Street, hold it for as long as you can. Okay. So the folks that are doing the new linear park there, I can't think of the name of
The
it.
low line.
The low line, they're already trying to incorporate that into the low line where they can hold water as long as possible. So as it moves down to the edges of the peninsula, we slow it down, give that water a chance to get out. We're also going to look for opportunities inside the barrier to store storm water. That's a very prominent piece of the Dutch plan. How do you store water on the inside of the barrier? Now, what I will tell you as city planners, what you're going to face is people maybe don't like that.
Right.
They want the wall to look like the high battery and the low battery all around the whole peninsula. Okay. The minute you tell them you're going to put a wall out into the marsh, now the people that like marsh aren't happy with it. And the people that want it right up against the road, like the low battery, aren't happy. You move it inside, you lose the ability to store that water on the inside. So there's a lot of competing interests that we have in trying to work these out.
Well, the places that have sea views right now will soon have a marsh and retention pond view.
That's a possibility. Now we're hoping one of the things that you do get from a project like this is benefits. It's called recreation.
Yeah.
So anywhere we can, we are trying to put a walkway on top of this perimeter wall so people can access it and actually get out and see what's going on the, we want that connection to the water. We want to preserve that as best we can.
Right. Well, Yante, did you want to ask a question related to public health here? Well, you had specifically talked about how you have a better understanding now of how this fits in the overall.
Yeah, and when I was reading, I think it wasn't I can't remember which article it was, but one of the articles that you posted, my biggest, like you'll see in my paper, my biggest take on this is, what really stood out to me was how the surge was projected to kind of mitigate the risk of like it brought up how it could like help with the flooding that occurs whenever like a hurricane hits and it affects the medical district. Like I know personally working at Roper and both at NUSC.
I was hoping you would go there. Okay.
Yeah, and during the last, I can't remember what the name of the hurricane, what the last like hurricane that happened, and how like literally it was so chaotic. It was one of the worst, most traumatic things I experienced. How doctors were not able to get on the highway in time to even try to make it, and patients were freaking out and nurses were freaking out because like we just couldn't we couldn't really work effectively, because it was very sudden. And even though we had planned and prepared, we didn't do it enough. So I was just reading the article about how it was talking about how the surge wall would definitely it is projected to kind of help mitigate the risk of the panic and the literal trauma that occurs whenever a sudden hurricane comes, or a hurricane comes more than expected, or like whatever the case may be. Because it's definitely very chaotic and traumatic, and it causes a trend of just like panic and anxiety whenever for the future projections, like because you just never really know. Like there are so many different patients who just didn't know what to do. Having to tell a patient, well, your doctor can't get here this morning, and you can't have your procedure today, but they desperately need it. They've been waiting on it. It's very traumatic. So that was the main thing that stood out to me. So I've been trying to kind of doing research on how often hurricanes and tropical storms have affected the medical district.
Right. I know Mark is dying to jump in here and talk about that because that's a really important part of the Dutch dialogue, and I'm sure the city's approach too.
Well, Deonta, I appreciate your comments, and I'd like to take you around the city with me, and you can do a testimony to people who question the value of this project, because that's job one right there, right, is taking care of life and safety.
Yeah.
And you just described why this is so important, because life and safety is so important. And the resources that we have there in the medical district, they don't just serve, and you know this, you work there, they just don't serve the city of Charleston. They serve the region, the state, and in some cases, they serve multi-state areas with the specialties they have. We cannot afford to lose that valuable resource that sits on the peninsula. We just can't. And then you add the colleges in that we have, the institutions of higher learning. Every level of government is represented on the peninsula. The new biotech place over at West Edge, all of a sudden you begin to draw this story that says the region really depends on what the peninsula has to offer. The area that you went is the area that I go first, which is the medical district, because that's life or death.
Mhm.
But the rest of it is important as well. 22,000 jobs come in and out of
Yeah.
the district every day.
Yeah.
So anyway, great point. Thank you for bringing it up. I'm glad this is recorded. I'm going to take it around with me.
Mhm.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Yoni. Does anybody else have a question they want to bring out at this point?
I had a question. I was just wondering, like, why you were planning the barrier wall into the east side instead of going all the way around the peninsula. And it looks like on the maps, the flooding maps in like 50 years or 70 years, that those places will be totally flooded and underwater.
So are you basically asking why they chose or the route?
Yeah, I mean, why would they choose that instead of going around the whole peninsula? Like on the east side, they're kind of coming in.
Well, I think
Yeah, that's a good question. Emma, the area that you're seeing on the east side that's not included in the wall, that's port property. So some of that is actually
Right.
piers, and
Mhm.
some of it's just vacant port land. And two things there. One, all of the people on the east side are inside the wall, so they're protected.
Mhm.
We worked with the port to see where and how we could put the wall on the port, and they didn't want it on the port because it got in the way of their operations. So those questions were asked and answered. We did not leave anybody on the east side out. Those people who live over there will be inside the wall.
But as you go
Right.
further up the peninsula, places like, what is it, Rosemont, or some of the areas further up are certainly plenty outside the wall.
Right. So, and that's where I spent 4 hours yesterday in a tropical storm. So because you've got to get a project that's has a positive cost benefit ratio, we looked really hard at how we could take the wall out and around. We looked at two areas. We looked at the cemetery as well as Bridgeview, okay? And the thought was, how can we bring those inside the wall? And what the conclusion was that there's other ways of protecting them. That community will be protected to the same level as everywhere else on the peninsula. So everywhere else on the peninsula is protected to a 12-foot NAVD 88 storm. The Bridgeview complex will as well, okay? It will be using what non-structural measures, perhaps. It may be a small wall around it. It may be. We haven't figured that out yet. But we cannot, those properties, the facts that they're highlighted, means that they're inside the study, means that they have to meet the same level of protection. Went to Rosemont yesterday. Rosemont, there's a number of homes up in Rosemont that are already elevated above 12 feet NAVD 88. So the wall being around Rosemont wouldn't protect them. So are there other homes that we could raise to get all of the homes out of harm's way? Those are the types of things that we're looking at right now. But to the interpretation that they're being forgotten or not included, nothing could be further from the truth. They're just doing it in different ways.
Well, I think you made the good point, if I can interject real quick, that there is an analysis that goes on that tries to justify the cost in terms of the potential savings and the value to saving human life. And to that extent, density is helpful because it helps the numbers to look better. And so, you know, what we have is the more spread out things get, the more difficult it is to justify the money. Which brings me to a question that I would have that I think we alluded to earlier about the effect this may have on other areas. And that is that, do you think that people will be entirely satisfied with the sort of green infrastructure proposals being developed right now for the outlying areas? Or do you feel like there's going to be a need for more a hard infrastructure there, or does it vary, of course, based on whether you're talking about a Bay Area island or inland?
Yeah, I think we're really early in that discussion, and I can only speak for the city of Charleston now. But I mean, it's obvious that all of the edges of the city of Charleston are going to be subject to the effects of sea level rise and a changing climate. Okay, West Ashley, certainly the Church Creek Basin. You know, these intense rainstorms coupled with increasing high tides has experienced more flooding recently. And so that has to be addressed. A wall like this would not help West Ashley. It just, okay. And we don't want to have solutions where you say we're going to go around and wall in every portion of the city of Charleston. That's not what makes sense. So we are in the beginning stages of updating our comprehensive plan. Okay. And within that plan, we have got to, we're going to use the Dutch dialogues. We're going to use our vulnerability assessment, and we're going to have to make land use decisions that recognize the fact that maybe we can't build in the future where we've been building in the past.
Yeah.
Maybe we're going to have to recognize that some of those homes along the edges, and we're talking 50, 100 years out, they may have to be raised, okay, as we go along. And then we'll have to talk about more drastic measures as we get 50, 100, 150 years out.
Yeah.
Everybody in this room right now in this class understands what's happening with a changing climate and some of the projections with sea level rise. The coast is going to change dramatically.
Right. Well, one of the things I'd like to game plan actually is a couple of alternatives, really. One is, of course, which is, I think, the basis of many of the proposals for West Ashley planning, and I assume, therefore, for Mount Pleasant and other places, is the natural one to build on high land, Johns Island. And that, you know, we limit construction, if not actually take out certain buildings that are in the lower land in order to promote that. Then we build at higher densities in those areas where we have higher land. The question I think that lingers in people's minds, if you don't mind my putting it that way, is frankly that we have you know, the other alternative, which no one seems to want to address, and that is the idea that, well, maybe we should be moving people out of the area instead of increasing density. And I guess that relates to infrastructure, not just drainage, but sewage and water and provisions for that. And I know the city would be reluctant to do that because there goes the tax base. But how can we balance those things, especially since you're talking about drastic changes in lifestyle and housing types and that sort of thing, it seems to me at least, when we address that.
Yeah, so you're talking about managed retreat.
Right.
And what you don't want is forced relocation.
Right.
Forced because of, you know, a big storm or something. You're talking about managed retreat. What I will say, just the preface, is that the biggest issue with managed retreat is the fact that the communities that are in harm's way often are communities that have been there for years and years and years, and they're part of the fabric of your city, your town, whatever.
That's right.
We as a city have not moved in the direction yet of talking about managed retreat from any of our areas. Our goal is, and you know, so West Ashley, let me use the West Ashley example. Right now, we have an ongoing program of buying homes in the floodplain that have been severely flooded. Okay, so that's ongoing. We're probably up to maybe 40 something homes now we've bought out in the last 3 years. Those are homes, severe repetitive loss homes are coming out of the floodplain. That land is being turned into green space, parks. We're working with a whole host of people to reclaim that land. We just got 2 grants approved from the National Wildlife Federation, where we are taking areas of West Ashley and creating, reconnecting the waterways up there as per the Dutch Dialogue's recommendation, where we're connecting. It's the Church Creek with the other creek that was disconnected from years ago, and we're going to reconnect that. And we're going to create a big green space up there, so act like a sponge to connect that water as it's coming down. At the same time, we've instituted the strictest stormwater requirements in the entire city, maybe the entire state, up in the Church Creek Basin. That will require anybody that builds up there to make sure that none of their stormwater will impact anybody around them. And in fact, they actually have to improve the way stormwater works in the Church Creek Basin. So we are doing as much as we can to maintain communities as we can. The concept of managed retreat is not something that we're actively talking about today. If we can, obviously 100 years from now, that's a different time. 70 years from now, that's a different time. I'll be interested to see what the comprehensive plan talks about. That's going to be a big community input. It'll be interesting to see what the community has to say. But right now, we're looking for natural solutions where we can, hard solutions where we have to, and certainly where we can afford it, and then start projecting out from that.
Well, I think, that certainly makes sense to try to take things one at a time. We do have people who are showing, the Empire State Building underwater, and that seems to be a little extreme. And the same folks, have a rather devastating view of the future. And I'm not sure that that's entirely appropriate. In my experience, you don't get anywhere by panicking.
That's right.
In that regard, and maybe thinking out, there are 3 points that I'd like to make. One is that somehow or other, as in other states, we can form sister city alliances with people inland so that we can exchange, especially when we have to evacuate, a place that is, a second home or something. That would be one thought. And it's interesting that Carborough is a sister city of, I forget which city in the coastal North Carolina right now. And that is a way to help to preserve a culture and to make stronger ties with the region. And then the other thought really is related to the College of Charleston and what role you see the college playing in to facilitate this. I know this, Paul Patrick is very concerned as the largest property owner downtown, or nearly so, what their response to the wall should be. I feel like we have an obligation to try to contribute to the recommendations of the Dutch and try to, bring those forward in our own, projects and so forth. And then, so there's the college, there's the idea of, how do we manage to develop a relationship that works long-term to kind of give everybody the options they need to deal with an uncertain future. Let's just start with those two and get your response, because I know time is of the essence here.
Well, the first one, the sister city one's a great idea. I believe Mount Pleasant does that. They have a sister city. We in the city have a sister city, but it's in France, so that doesn't.
Well, if we got range transportation, I'm game for
That's
that.
right. Well, we probably, actually, we had this conversation today. It's something we should look at about getting, there is the emergency management compact that exists. So we have a bunch of sister cities that we provide us support, but we don't yet have that sister city where people could go and stay as we were cleaning up from some kind of big disaster. That's actually a really good idea. The second one about, the people that live on the peninsula, kind of our assumption is that people live on the peninsula, want to stay on the peninsula. It's a great place to be. It's a great, it's one of a kind. I have lived, and for those who don't know me, I have lived on every state on the East Coast, many of them twice, okay? So I have traveled, I was active duty for 35 years, and I always lived on a seacoast town, being in the Coast Guard. I can tell you there is no other city like the Charleston Peninsula. It just doesn't exist. We've preserved our history better. We've taken better care of our architecture. It's very difficult to find in a confined area all of the quality institutions of higher learning that we have on the peninsula. It is really one of a kind gem up and down the East Coast of the United States. That's really worth protecting, okay? And in terms of, you know, the college, I actually, after our phone call yesterday or last week, I called Norm up, and hopefully I'm going to come over and sit down and talk to that task force, because I'm really interested in thoughts. You are thoughtful people. You have, you know, things that you're thinking about. You have certainly worlds of expertise that I think we could benefit from. And I know Paul Patrick, and I think he's also a very thoughtful person. And I think we need to get the best minds together to figure out about how we move forward in the future. I'm all for that, and I know the mayor is as well. But specific to this project, what we're talking about, you know, after going through this Army Corps process, we started with 43 alternatives, different ways that we could protect against this types of storms. We ended up with a wall. We never thought we'd end up with a wall. We never, ever thought we'd end up with a 12-foot wall. Okay, I didn't. Okay.
Right.
However, if you read the Dutch Dialogues report, when Steven Schlaber, who's a landscape architect, and the guy, I can't think of his name, Peter Dietrich, who's built the biggest systems around the world, they spent about 1.5 hours looking at our city, and their response was, you need a perimeter protection system. It's going to be between 9 and 12 feet high.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, you know, the two came together. That's in the Dutch Dialogues report as well.
Yeah. No, and I think that the college, you're right, the college can provide an incredible resource of information and data. I mean, one of the things that came from the discussion during the Dutch Dialogue is that we really have not been studying our water table and our subsurface conditions adequately, and we need to put in place a way to monitor that, because what we're doing in building the polar system is adjusting that. And the results of that could either be settlement or vegetation dying or, you know, whatever. We need to be much more responsible, like the Dutch, in doing that. I now remember what the third thing was, and this is a good place to end up, I think. If other people can respond to this, however, please do, you guys. I'm not trying to, you know, close out the conversation here. I apologize. But the idea of a regional governance is one that we've touched on before. And, you know, it's heartbreaking to think that we used to have one in the coastal, what was it, the Coastal Conservation League, but the Coastal Council, that's it. And that was a water authority that was done away with, I think, during Beasley's time, because of the upset over Lucas and, you know, that private property case. But, you know, they were set up as a water district similar to the way the 4 water districts in Florida are set up, as a way to provide the regional governance to make, you know, decisions across the board. Where do you see that going at this point? That's going to be a sensitive topic, I'm sure, but I think it's one that's really important.
Well, I think I'll answer it this way. When we went to New Orleans, we took a trip to New Orleans to study their protection system and how you operate gates and how many people it takes and what do these barrier systems look like. We left there and we went to Baton Rouge and to the Louisiana State University, where we went to the Water Institute, and we talked about regional governance, and we talked about how that looks and functions. And Louisiana has a very mature one, but it has taken years and years to get that started. We had that discussion, if you remember, at the end of the Dutch Dialogues presentation. We brought those folks in specifically to have that discussion. It was getting some attention up until the COVID-19 hit.
Right.
Actually had some plans of some things happening. Once we get through this, we'll probably reignite that. But I think we need a regional one, and I will go on the record saying this, we need a regional effort to start, and it's got to start pretty quickly because they take years to mature. They literally take years, if not decades, to mature.
Well, do you think this is something that could be folded into the Council of Governments or require separate authority?
I don't know. That's a good question. Certainly the COG is, you know, it's a 3-county region. I think the governor's floodwater commission, and I'm going by memory here, there was some discussion in there of, you know, how do you regionalize some of this, but I don't think it got very mature. And I think the report has really kind of, we got to go back and start peeling that report out and start looking at it. But it's something whose time is here. I think we should look to states like Louisiana, Virginia, Florida, who have done this and have done it at the state level, and see how it could fit in South Carolina. I certainly don't want to be telling the state what to do, but I think, we've got a pretty responsive legislature, and certainly our governor is very engaged. Getting them to, at least take a look at this and see how we could craft one of those in South Carolina would be really helpful.
Well, that's great. And Jason, you were away working. Did you have a question or thought? I'll give it to you at this point if you like. Jason? Maybe he's not gotten back from work yet. He's having to balance working and then coming into class, and part of it is transit time. So anyway, we'll take his comments later. Yes, Gabriel, you have a question?
Yeah. So first of all, I would like to thank Mark for his explanations, which really helped to clarify the ambitions of the Army Corps of Engineers project and how it seeks to work with the Dutch dialogues. And also in addressing our criticisms of the program, because of course, right now, especially as students in this period when the Army Corps is reaching out to the community for criticisms, that is especially what is on our mind, but you've done a great job of addressing that. So,
Go ahead.
So keeping in that idea that you presented us with, that really the seawall is the first step in building Charleston's resiliency in a process that's going to have to keep up and continue to be updated throughout the future to really address the full scale of sea level rise and climate change. I was wondering if there's any talks or plans right now in the current seawall to engineer it with adaptability in mind so that future additions can be added without too much of struggle renovating it, and if it's being made in maybe a modular manner that can help add on more additions.
I got to tell you, that's a great question. We spent about 20 minutes today on a phone call discussing this. So the short answer is yes, but, okay? So it's one of the questions that has to be answered. We are going, as a city, we are going to make comments to the Army Corps that we want it to be adaptable so that it can be raised. The challenge is, and this is going to be interesting now, and this is why it's a great question, because I just learned this today. There are restrictions that we have going above a 12-foot wall. Those restrictions happen at the Ashley River bridges, because if we go higher, we're bumping into the bridges. Now you're cutting off the bridges. And the I-26 bridge as well. You begin to back yourself into a 12-foot wall. What we have to do is be able to engineer above that, okay? We have to be able to engineer our way through that. But that's a great question. It was asked today by the representative from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Climate Center of Excellence. They're part of the vertical team, and they're asking those questions. Because in the New York project we learned today, they actually are building the bases wider so that they can go up higher. Here's a good example. Our low battery that's being built at 2.5 feet, we're going up 2.5 feet from where it was. We're building that so it can go up another 3 feet so it can be at the height of the new seawall. So we're building that one adaptable, okay? And the idea is to build this other one adaptable so we can even go up further. But it does come with there are some restrictions, and a lot of it has to do with the ground height and what's in your way. But great question, super good question.
And hopefully we'll be designing our bicycle bridge with that in mind as well.
That's exactly right.
It'd be interesting if the only way we can get in and out of the peninsula for a while be on a bicycle. It might promote bicycle usage.
There you go. That's right.
So if that's the case, that we end up being ultimately limited by places like the I-96 highway that you mentioned and the bridge, is there any process that can be gone through to renovate those bits of infrastructure to accommodate for a new construction with the bridge, or is it kind of getting tangled in this net of bureaucracy and procedures?
No, it'll have to be. I mean, those bridges, if we had to go above 12 feet, I would, this is non-scientific, but we're talking 40 years out from now. Those bridges on the Ashley River will be up for some kind of renewal or something within 40 years. But we're going to have to find a way to engineer our way through that if that's what happens. And, these are engineering challenges. Just going around, here's something else for the planners of the world, okay? In Charleston, everybody loves to build on the edge to the edge, okay? That's my byline. You build on the edge to the edge. When you build on the edge to the edge, you don't give yourself much room to protect yourself, do you?
Right.
So right now, what we've done is we've put ourselves in a really precarious situation when it comes to trying to protect ourselves from the sea. Everybody wants to be right on the water until the water's in their living room, okay? Then they want to find a way to keep it out. And we've built to the edge, on the edge. So, we did all the things we did, what we thought was right when the time we were doing them. And now times are changing. And so we as a city, we as a nation are going to have to adjust, think differently. And you all are going to be the ones kind of leading that charge.
Well, I think it's interesting too, because this kind of fits Mayor Riley's thoughts about the city and having public access all the way around it. So
Yeah.
This is an opportunity for that.
If we can help him finish that vision, that would be great right there.
Yeah, a lot of reasons. Mark, thank you so much for your time. Were there other questions, anybody?
I just had one more question,
Sure.
if that's okay. So you said when you first went into this, you were completely against, or you didn't think you were going to do a wall, and you seemed like you were against the wall. Why did you think that?
What I didn't think is that we would need a wall all around the peninsula. Okay. So the study area was the entire peninsula. I have been chasing floods in the city now for 7 years. I'm the guy that's up. If it's flooding at 3 a.m, I'm driving around to see where it's flooding. It was not lost on me that we were going to need walls in places of the city to keep flooding from getting into streets and in people's homes. I knew that. I did not think we would need it to the extent that it's turned out that we do, or to the height. That was what surprised me.
Okay, thanks.
Well, of course, the wall is not dealing with flooding per se. It's dealing with storm surge.
Right.
Right.
And high tide flooding.
Oh.
We will be able to think Christmas time, the flooding we had over Christmas time, we will be able to close the gates and prevent that type of flooding from happening. And that was really destructive flooding. We had 3-4 feet of seawater on streets in the city. We'll be able to prevent that in the future.
Yep.
I had one question that just came. So while y'all are doing the research, has there been any type of maybe just discussion regarding the potential for inequities and injustices that could emerge from the building of this wall, or is that not a factor since this is kind of like a environmental project?
So you're talking about environmental justice here?
Yeah, have y'all talked about the potential for the wall to create some type of injustice, whether it be environmental injustice,
Right,
racial injustice, anything like that? Is there potential for this project to create that kind of barrier or not?
Well, another great question, and I thank you for asking it. I'll start by saying, not only can the Corps not be part of a project like that, but the city puts that at the front of its concerns in almost everything that we do. So we have looked at, and we have said many times through our deliberations, that this project has to be for the good of all.
Okay.
Sometimes that means that others may not get exactly what they want. because the idea is we've got to create a project that's for the good of all.
Okay.
Social justice is right at the front. I can't tell you, like I said, I spent 4 hours in the rain yesterday making sure that we had good data that we could use in pushing this project forward. And we had a team of 12 or 15 people out there making sure we get this done. It is something that is on the forefront of everything that we do. So the short answer is yes. And I would challenge all of you to hold us accountable to that in the future. When we actually get around to building this, you all please make sure that the people that follow me and others, you hold them accountable.
Well, you can understand how there's a certain reticence there, considering what's happening right now with West Edge and filling in one of the last creeks. And there's an area just behind it, African-American community, of course, that's flooding a great deal. And so there's a concern. People are not looking at the engineering, they're just looking at what happens in their backyard.
Right. And I that'd be a great whole other discussion over there someday.
Right. Let me see. So anybody else? Questions? This is a great opportunity. And like I say, we're recording it, so I will provide a copy to you. And I think we paused there in the middle when we had a technical problem.
Sorry. Sorry about that.
No, hey, look, this is our lives right now, right?
Well, if it makes anybody feel any better, I was on a call with Apple the other day. It was a worldwide call with Apple, and their systems went down. So I don't feel that bad.
Yeah,
Okay.
right. No, exactly.
Dealing with the COVID crisis. So
Yeah, we're all doing, I think, pretty well, considering. We just need
Yes.
to do better, that's all. Well, folks.
I've actually got one more question, Mark.
All right, Gabriel.
Sure.
So thank you for your time. I just wanted to ask, because this seawall, if it goes through, and chances are high that because it's on the top of the list, at least in the considerations, it'll be one of the biggest things happening in Charleston. And it will probably be the center of a lot of activity for the years to come, especially for students like us, students of historic preservation and urban planning.
Yep.
So I was wondering if you have any avenues to recommend for getting involved in this project in the years to come.
You mean professionally, internship, both, what?
Yep, internships and professionally, whether if going through the public route through the city government or the state government is the best way to do that, or if there's also private organizations that are looking for students who are graduating from this area and are want to take on the insights of the education of urban planning and historic preservation.
Right.
So that's another great question. I'm going to answer that question, and I think I can give you good advice here. This wall will not probably be started if everything fell into perfect place. The absolute earliest this would start would be 2026. Okay, and that'd be 2 years of additional in-depth engineering and real estate acquisitions, etc. I would advise any students right now to be looking at city government, county government, state government, but also federal government, Army Corps of Engineers. They've got a huge presence here in Charleston, very big. But also, because of the amount of money this is, it is going to involve many, many, many private firms that help to put the plans together when we really get into the real engineering and design of this. There will be many private firms that will come under contract to the Army Corps of Engineers who will build it. And I would think that there'll be plenty of opportunity there.
Great, fantastic. So I'm going to limit it to, we've been talking for almost an hour, and that's about as long as I can get to upload on the Zoom video onto YouTube. So I'm going to call it here. It's a good transition. Thank you so much, Mark.
Okay,
Bye.
thank you all, and good luck to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, so I'm going to pause recording.